J.C. Dugard. On a summer afternoon in 2009, a man walked onto the campus of the University of California, Berkeley, looking for a permit to hand out religious literature. He had two young girls with him, and something about the interaction unsettled the campus staff. A special events manager named Lisa Campbell and a campus police officer named Allie Jacobs ran a routine background check on the man. And what came back changed everything. His name was Philip Craig Garrido. He was a registered sex offender on federal parole for a prior kidnapping, and nobody in the system had any record of him having children. That single background check would crack open one of the longest-held captivities in American history. 18 years before that visit to Berkeley, a girl was walking up a hill to her school bus stop in Myers, California, a small community south of Lake Tahoe. She was in 5th grade, looking forward to a school field trip. Her family had recently moved to the area from Arcadia, partly because they thought the mountain town would be safer. On the morning of June 10th, 1991, a gray Ford sedan pulled alongside her. Garrido, who was 40 at the time and already a convicted offender on federal parole, rolled down the window while his wife Nancy sat in the passenger seat. He incapacitated her from the window while his wife Nancy helped pull the girl into the car. JC's stepfather, Carl Probin, watched the entire thing from the driveway and chased the vehicle on his bicycle. But the car was too fast. She was gone within seconds. Garrido drove roughly 160 miles to a property on Walnut Avenue in Antioch, California, in Contra Costa County. Behind the house, concealed by tarps and overgrowth and invisible from the street, was a cluster of tents, sheds, and lean-tos. That hidden compound became JC's world for the next 18 years. For the first 18 months, she was kept inside a backyard shed. She did not leave the backyard at all for the first 4 years. Garrido gave her a false name, Alyssa, and the scope of the harm she endured during that captivity was staggering. She gave birth to 2 daughters without any medical assistance, the first when she was still a child herself, and the second a few years later. As the girls grew older, the Garridos presented JC and her daughters as relatives connected to Philip's small printing business, a company he called Printing for Less. And somehow, it gets worse. California parole agents had multiple opportunities to discover JC over those 18 years and missed every single one. In 2006, someone called the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office to report that children were living in tents behind the Garrido house. Nothing came of it. It was not law enforcement who finally connected the dots. It was Lisa Campbell and Allie Jacobs on that Berkeley campus. When Garrido's parole officer was contacted and told there were children in his care, the officer had no idea they existed. Garrido was ordered to appear at the parole office in Concord, and he arrived with the 2 girls and a 4th person who, at first, gave the name Alyssa and claimed she was fleeing an abusive husband in Minnesota. Then, Garrido confessed. On April 28, 2011, Philip and Nancy Garrido both pleaded guilty. Philip received 431 years to life. Nancy received 36 years to life. JC provided a written victim impact statement, but chose not to attend the sentencing in person. The state of California paid her a $20 million settlement after an inspector general's review found catastrophic failures in the parole system. As of 2026, J.C. Dugard lives privately in Northern California with her 2 adult daughters. She published 2 memoirs and founded the JAYC Foundation, which supports families recovering from abduction trauma. Philip Garrido remains at Corcoran State Prison. Nancy Garrido is at the California Institution for Women in Chino and becomes parole eligible in August of 2029. JC's case laid bare how badly a system can fail a single person. But it also showed that sometimes a breakthrough comes from the most unexpected place, like a campus permit office on a quiet Tuesday. The next case proved something even harder to believe, that a person could vanish in the middle of a major European capital and remain hidden for nearly a decade. Natasha Kampusch, a concrete cell beneath a garage, roughly 5 square meters. No windows, soundproofed walls, a bed, a sink, a toilet. That was the entire world of a girl from Vienna for 3,096 days. Natasha Kampusch was the youngest of 3 sisters, living with her mother Brigitta Schirny in the Donaustadt district of the city. Her parents had separated, and by her own later account, her home life was strained. She was quiet, somewhat solitary, and on the morning of March 2, 1998, she was walking to school by herself for the very first time. Her route took her down a residential street called Melangasa. She never arrived. At around 7:15 that morning, a man named Wolfgang Priklopil pulled up in a white Mercedes panel van on a street called Melangasa in Donaustadt. He was 35, an unemployed communications technician. He dragged her inside and drove her roughly 15 miles north to his home in Strasshof an der Nordbahn. Austrian police launched what became the largest missing person search in the country's history. Among the leads they checked were owners of white vans, and Priklopil himself was briefly questioned. He was dismissed as a suspect. What followed was 8 years and 5 months of captivity in a space barely large enough to stretch out in. In the early years, she was confined for days at a time, beneath the garage, behind a concealed door hidden by a cabinet. She was physically harmed, deprived of food, and subjected to prolonged abuse. Priklopil controlled everything she read, ate, and watched. As the years passed, he allowed her upstairs to cook and clean, and on rare occasions took her on outings, including a brief skiing trip. Every single time, he threatened to take her life and the life of anyone she spoke to. Then, on August 23, 2006, after 8 years and 5 months, a window opened. Natasha, now 18 years old, was vacuuming Priklopil's BMW in the garden when his cell phone rang. The vacuum was loud enough that he walked several steps away to take the call. She left the vacuum running, sprinted roughly 200 meters through neighboring gardens, and tried to flag down passers-by. Several people ignored her. After about 5 minutes, she pounded on the window of a 71-year-old neighbor and announced her name. Police arrived at 4 minutes past 1 in the afternoon and verified her identity through a scar, an old passport that was still inside the cell, and DNA testing. That same night, Priklopil drove to Vienna, abandoned his car, and took his own life by stepping in front of a commuter train at the Wien Nord station. Because Priklopil was dead, there was no trial. Austrian investigators launched a secondary inquiry into whether he had accomplices, and a 2013 report concluded he had acted alone, though the finding remained controversial and the subject of public debate. An internal audit exposed serious investigative failures, including the fact that police had received a tip connecting Priklopil's van to the abduction scene as early as 1998 and never followed up on it properly. A schoolmate of Natasha's had even witnessed the abduction and described the van to investigators at the time. The lead detective on the original case, Lieutenant Colonel Franz Kroll, died of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound in 2010 during the secondary investigation. Natasha Kampusch published her memoir, which she titled after the exact number of days she was held. It was later adapted into a film released in 2013. She has openly rejected suggestions that she suffers from Stockholm Syndrome and has insisted that she alone has the right to define her own complex feelings about what happened to her. She inherited Priklopil's house under Austrian property law as compensation, and it has been preserved. As of 2026, she is 38, lives in Vienna, has worked as a television host and podcast host, and continues humanitarian efforts, including supporting hospitals in Sri Lanka and animal welfare causes. Natasha's captivity played out behind a concealed door in a quiet suburb, invisible to the outside world. Across the Atlantic, another captor hid his crimes in plain sight for over a decade. on a residential street in Cleveland, Ohio, where neighbors walked past the house every single day. Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. On the afternoon of May 6, 2013, a woman kicked through the screen of a storm door on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood, screaming for someone to call the police. She had a 6-year-old girl with her. Neighbors Charles Ramsey and Angel Cordero broke through the remaining screen so she could crawl out. Within minutes, she was on the phone with a 911 dispatcher, telling them her name, telling them she had been missing for 10 years, telling them she was free. And she was not the only person inside that house. That house belonged to Ariel Castro, a school bus driver for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Between 2002 and 2004, he had lured 3 young women inside on separate occasions, and none of them had been seen since. Michelle Knight was 21 when she vanished on August 23, 2002. She was on her way to a custody hearing when Castro, who was a cousin of one of her friends, offered her a ride. Because she had prior reports of running away, police classified her as a runaway and eventually removed her from the FBI's missing persons database entirely. Amanda Berry was a teenager finishing a shift at a Burger King on Lorraine Avenue when Castro, the father of her classmate, offered her a ride on April 21, 2003, the day before her birthday. She was lured to the Seymour Avenue house under the pretext that her friend was inside. A week later, Castro used her cell phone to call her mother and say he had Amanda and that she would be home soon. Her mother passed away in 2006 without ever learning the truth. Gina DeJesus was a student walking home from school on April 2, 2004, when Castro asked her to help carry a speaker to his car. She knew him because his daughter was her friend. For roughly 9 to 11 years, the 3 of them were kept in upstairs bedrooms behind boarded windows, nailed curtains, and barricaded doors. They were restrained, deprived of food, and subjected to repeated abuse. Michelle Knight, the eldest, endured the worst isolation. She told the court that the harm she suffered at Castro's hands was relentless and deliberate. On Christmas Day of 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter named Jocelyn, and it was Michelle who delivered the baby under threat. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Jocelyn grew up inside the house, occasionally allowed outside with Castro, who told the girl that the women in chains were her aunts. The escape on May 6th happened because Castro, for the first time in over a decade, failed to fully secure the front door before leaving for an errand. Amanda saw the opening, literally, and she took it. She kicked at the storm door screen with her 6-year-old daughter beside her and screamed until neighbors came running. Cleveland police officers Michael Tracy, Barbara Johnson, and Anthony Espada entered the house with weapons drawn. Michelle Knight ran into an officer's arms, and Gina DeJesus emerged from another room moments later. Castro was arrested within hours. On July 26, 2013, he pleaded guilty to 937 counts. On August 1st, Judge Michael J. Russo sentenced him to life without parole plus 1,000 years. Michelle Knight was the only victim who addressed him directly in court. She told him she had spent 11 years in a place of unimaginable suffering, and that his own suffering was only beginning. 1 month into his sentence, Castro was found dead in his cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio, having taken his own life with a bedsheet. The house on Seymour Avenue was demolished on August 7, 2013. As of 2026, Amanda Berry hosts a daily missing persons segment on Cleveland's Fox 8. Gina DeJesus co-founded the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults, deliberately located near the demolished Seymour Avenue site. Michelle Knight changed her name to Lily Rose Lee, married, and published 2 books. Jocelyn, Amanda's daughter, celebrated her 19th birthday in December of 2025. 3 women held captive for a decade in the middle of a residential neighborhood, with people walking past every day. It defies comprehension. But the next case on this list challenges something even more fundamental. Because in this one, the captive was eventually allowed to leave, to jog, to work a paying job, and still did not escape for years. Colleen Stan. There are cases defined by locked doors and physical barriers. And then there are cases where the prison exists almost entirely inside the mind. Colleen Stan's case is still cited at the FBI Academy as one of the most extreme examples of psychological coercion ever documented. In May of 1977, Stan was a 20-year-old living in Eugene, Oregon, hitchhiking to a friend's birthday party in Westwood, California. She had turned down 2 previous rides before climbing into a blue Dodge van occupied by a young couple and their baby. The family setup made her feel safe. The man driving was Cameron Hooker. His wife, Janice, sat beside him with the infant. After a gas station stop, Cameron pulled off the highway near Red Bluff in Tehama County, claiming he wanted to look at caves, while Janice walked the baby toward a nearby lake. Cameron held a knife to Colleen's throat, bound her, and clamped a 20-pound homemade wooden box over her head. The box was soundproofed, lightless, and nearly airtight. For the next 7 years, the Hookers held Colleen at their home in Red Bluff. She was kept in a coffin-sized wooden box stored beneath their waterbed, sometimes for as long as 23 hours a day. She was subjected to repeated physical and sexual violence. Cameron forced her to sign a fabricated contract purporting to bind her to a fictitious organization he called the Company, which he told her would harm her family if she ever tried to leave. That's not a typo, by the way. A completely invented criminal syndicate, one that did not exist, became the mechanism that held Colleen Stan in place for years. By 1981, she was permitted to write a letter home. In March of that year, she was allowed a 24-hour unsupervised visit to her family in Riverside, California, and she did not tell anyone what was happening to her. By 1983, the Hookers had introduced her to their daughters and neighbors under a false identity. In May of 1984, she was allowed to take a paid job as a maid at a local motel and even to jog alone outside. She still did not run. The psychological control was that total. Everything shifted in August of 1984, when Cameron told Janice he intended to take Colleen as a second wife and to acquire another captive. Janice, who was herself a long-term victim of Cameron's abuse, finally broke. After speaking with a local Christian pastor, she told Colleen the truth. The Company did not exist. It never had. On August 9th, 1984, Colleen walked to a bus station, called Cameron on the phone to tell him she was leaving, and went home to her family. She did not contact police. Janice had asked her to give Cameron a chance to reform. 3 months later, in November, Janice Hooker walked into the Red Bluff police station and confessed everything. Cameron Hooker was arrested and charged in Tehama County Superior Court. Janice received full immunity in exchange for her testimony. The trial in 1985 featured the head box, the coffin box, photographs, and the slavery contract as physical evidence. On October 31st, 1985, Cameron was found guilty on 7 of 8 counts. The judge called him the worst case he had ever encountered and sentenced him to 104 years in state prison. As of 2026, Cameron Hooker became eligible for parole consideration in 2020 due to good conduct credits accumulated under California's prison policies. Stan and the Tehama County District Attorney's Office have pushed to have him civilly committed under California's Sexually Violent Predator Act, which would keep him in a state hospital indefinitely. A jury trial on that commitment has been delayed multiple times, with proceedings scheduled for January of 2026. Janice Hooker reverted to her maiden name and worked as a social worker in Northern California. Colleen Stan is now 69, lives privately in California, is a mother and a grandmother, and continues to speak publicly about her experience. In Colleen's case, the captor eventually loosened the physical restraints, confident that the psychological ones would hold. In the next case, the captor did the same thing, gradually allowing his young captive to ride bikes outside, use the internet, and socialize with neighborhood children, all while hiding in plain sight in a St. Louis suburb. Sean Hornbeck. On January 12, 2007, two police officers in Kirkwood, Missouri, were serving an unrelated warrant when they noticed a white Nissan pickup truck in an apartment complex parking lot. The truck matched a description tied to the abduction of a 13-year-old boy who had vanished from a school bus stop in Beaufort 4 days earlier. What investigators did not yet know was that inside the apartment connected to that truck, there were two missing children, and one of them had been there for more than 4 years. Sean Hornbeck lived with his mother and stepfather in Richwoods, a small community in Washington County, Missouri. He was an active fifth grader who spent afternoons riding his lime green bicycle to friends' houses. On the afternoon of October 6, 2002, Sean was riding his bike along a familiar route when a man in a white Nissan pickup deliberately bumped him off the road. The driver briefly acted concerned, then forced the boy into the truck at gunpoint, telling him he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man was Michael John Devlin, a 41-year-old pizza restaurant manager from Kirkwood. He drove Sean to his apartment on South Holmes Avenue, and for the next 4 years, 3 months and 6 days, nobody found him. The harm Sean endured during that time was extensive and sustained. Devlin threatened to take his life and the lives of his family if he attempted to flee. Federal charges later confirmed that Devlin had produced abuse imagery involving Sean and transported it across state lines. As time passed, Devlin gradually loosened restrictions. Sean was allowed to ride a bicycle outside, use a computer, and make friends with neighborhood children who knew him only as Sean Devlin. On at least 2 occasions, he posted messages on his own missing persons website using that name, asking how long his parents intended to search for him. His family did not connect the messages to their son. His parents, Pam and Craig Akers, had created the Sean Hornbeck Foundation and Search and Rescue Team, and they never stopped looking. This case could have gone cold entirely. By 2007, Sean had been missing for over 4 years. The initial searches had long since wound down, and the trail was ice cold. Then Devlin made the decision that unraveled everything. On January 8, 2007, he abducted a second child, 13-year-old Ben Ownby, from a school bus stop in Beaufort, Franklin County, Missouri. This time, a friend of the victim named Mitchell Hultz gave police a detailed description of a white Nissan pickup. That description is what brought officers Gary Wagster and Chris Nelson to Devlin's apartment building 4 days later. FBI agents Lynn Willett and Tina Richter interviewed Devlin, and Willett bluffed about having forensic tire cast evidence that tied his truck to the Ownby abduction scene. Devlin broke down and admitted the truth, telling them that the person he had been calling his godson was Sean Hornbeck. Officers entered the apartment and found both boys inside, playing video games. The press called it the Missouri Miracle. The legal reckoning was massive. Prosecutors in Franklin, Washington, and St. Louis counties, along with a U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri, filed more than 80 felony counts, including kidnapping, forcible sodomy, armed criminal action, and federal exploitation charges. On October 8th and 9th, 2007, Devlin pleaded guilty to all state charges. He received 3 life sentences plus 60 years in Washington County for the crimes against Sean, 1 life sentence in Franklin County for what he did to Ben Ownby, and 18 consecutive life sentences in St. Louis County. On December 7, 2007, a federal judge added 170 years for federal exploitation charges. The final aggregate sentence came to 74 life terms, plus roughly 2,020 additional years. In April of 2011, an inmate stabbed Devlin multiple times with 2 homemade weapons during breakfast at Crossroads Correctional Center in Cameron, Missouri. Devlin survived and was placed in protective custody. He remains incarcerated within the Missouri Department of Corrections. As of 2026, Sean Hornbeck is 34 years old. He has lived a private life away from the press, married, and works in the St. Louis area. His parents gave a 2008 interview in which Sean first publicly described his ordeal, and the family later disbanded the search and rescue organization they had created in his name. Katie Beers. For years, a man on Long Island had been digging. Not a basement, not a pool, but a 6 by 7 foot concrete bunker beneath his garden, accessible only through a 6-foot tunnel concealed behind a removable bookcase in his office and sealed with a 200-pound concrete trap door. He soundproofed it. He installed a small television and a closed-circuit camera. He built a coffin-sized inner box with a bed inside it. The child who would eventually be placed in that bunker had played in the dirt from the excavation as a toddler, never knowing what was being built beneath her feet. And when it was finished, he put her in it. The child was Katie Beers, and she was 2 days away from her 10th birthday. Katie's life before the abduction was already marked by harm. Her mother worked long hours and frequently left Katie and her older half-brother John in the care of her godmother, Linda Incaleri, and Incaleri's husband, Salvatore, who was later convicted of abusing both children and served roughly 12 years. One of the other adults in Katie's orbit was a man named John Esposito, a 43-year-old building contractor who had been arrested in 1977 for the attempted abduction of a 12-year-old boy. He had been in Katie's life for years, buying gifts, offering rides, and cultivating a position of trust within a family that was in no condition to protect its children. On December 28, 1992, 2 days before Katie's 10th birthday, Esposito offered to take her shopping for a present. Instead, he brought her to his home on Saxon Avenue in Bayshore, New York. After she played a video game in his bedroom, he forced her into the tunnel and down into the bunker he had spent years constructing beneath his garden. To cover his tracks, he made Katie record an audio message claiming an armed stranger had taken her, then played the recording at a payphone outside the Spaceplex amusement arcade in Nesconset, New York, before reporting her missing himself. For 16 days, Katie was held in that underground space, restrained and subjected to abuse. Esposito told her she would spend the rest of her life there, and that he planned to send police a photograph to make them believe she was gone for good. Katie discovered she could free her own restraint when left alone, but the concrete slab above her was far too heavy for her to move. Esposito visited her regularly, bringing junk food, blankets, and toys, while the search for her unfolded above ground. Suffolk County Police focused on Esposito almost immediately because of his known connection to the family, and he was placed under near-constant surveillance. He was interviewed multiple times, and his account of the evening did not hold together. On January 13, 1993, 16 days after Katie vanished, Esposito confessed to his lawyers, who notified police. He led detectives to the bunker, and Katie was found alive. Esposito pleaded guilty to first-degree kidnapping in Suffolk County Court on June 16, 1994. On July 27th of that year, Judge Arthur Pitts sentenced him to 15 years to life. Although he was not formally charged with the abuse due to the difficulty of testimony given Katie's age and trauma, the judge accepted during sentencing that it had occurred. Esposito was denied parole at 4 separate hearings between 1998 and 2013. On September 4, 2013, shortly after his final denial, he was found dead in his cell at Sing Sing Correctional Facility from what officials described as natural causes. Katie Beers was placed in foster care with a family in Suffolk County, where she found the stability she had never had. She completed school, married, became a mother of two, and earned a college degree. She published a memoir in 2013 with reporter Carolyn Gusoff and continues to give interviews and motivational talks about survival and recovery. As of 2026, she is 43 and lives in rural Pennsylvania. Katie's case was, at its core, the story of a predator hiding in plain sight within a family that was already failing her. The next case exposed something far larger. A predator whose crimes revealed the catastrophic collapse of an entire nation's law enforcement system. Sabine Dardenne. By the time a 12-year-old girl was forced into a white van on her way to school in Belgium, the man driving it had already taken 4 other girls. 2 of them were dying of starvation in his basement at that very moment. 2 others had already been buried alive on one of his properties, and not a single investigator in the country had connected the cases. The man was Marc Dutroux, a convicted offender who had been paroled in 1992 after serving only 3 years of a 13-year sentence for the abduction and abuse of 5 girls. The 12-year-old on the bicycle was Sabine Dardenne, riding to school in Caen, near Tournai, in the Walloon region of Belgium, on the morning of May 28, 1996. Dutroux and his accomplice Michel Lelièvre forced her into the van, while Lelièvre grabbed her bicycle. Sabine spent 80 days in a concealed cellar beneath Dutroux's house at 128 Avenue de Philippeville in Marcinelle, near Charleroi. She was subjected to prolonged abuse and deprivation. Dutroux constructed an elaborate lie to control her, claiming she had been targeted by a fictitious criminal boss who wanted her harmed, and that he was actually protecting her by keeping her hidden until her parents paid a ransom. He allowed her to write letters to her family, promising to deliver them. He never did. Despite her age, Sabine was confrontational throughout her captivity, repeatedly arguing with Dutroux and demanding answers. She later wrote that her defiance was the thing that kept her psychologically intact. On August 9, 1996, Dutroux abducted 14-year-old Laetitia Delhez from the town of Bertrix and placed her in the same cellar with Sabine. A witness in Bertrix had recorded a partial license plate from Dutroux's van. On August 13th, Belgian police arrested Dutroux, his wife Michelle Martin, and Lelièvre. After 2 days of interrogation, Dutroux led officers to the cellar, and both Sabine and Laetitia were rescued alive. And no, I am not making that up. During a search of the Marcinelle house in December of 1995, a full 8 months before Sabine's rescue, a Belgian officer had heard children's voices coming from inside the residence and attributed the sound to noise from outside. 2 young girls were starving in the cellar beneath his feet, and he walked away. The bodies of those 2 girls, 8-year-olds Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, were found buried in the garden of another Dutroux property in Sars-la-Buissière. The remains of 17-year-old Anmar Chal and 19-year-old Ifier Lambrex were recovered shortly after. A French accomplice named Bernard Weinstein, whom Dutroux had drugged and buried alive, was also exhumed. The scale of the institutional failure triggered a national crisis. On October 20th, 1996, roughly 300,000 Belgian citizens marched in Brussels in what became known as the Marche Blanche, demanding reform of the justice system. Belgian law enforcement was structurally reorganized in 2001, partly as a result of the case. Dutroux's trial did not begin until March 1st, 2004, nearly 8 years after his arrest, after rounds of delays that included a brief escape during a courthouse transfer in 1998. Sabine Dardenne testified on April 19, 2004, looking directly at Dutroux and asking him why he had not taken her life. On June 17th, the jury convicted him of multiple counts of kidnapping, abuse, and the taking of 3 lives. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on June 22nd. Michelle Martin received 30 years. Lelièvre received 25. A co-defendant named Michel Nihoul received 5 years on related drug charges. As of 2026, Dutroux remains imprisoned at Nivelles prison in Belgium. He has periodically sought early release and been denied each time. Michel Martin was paroled in 2012 to a convent and remains in conditional release. Sabine Dardenne published a memoir in 2004 and has lived a deliberately private adult life in Belgium, raising a family on her own terms. The Dutroux affair revealed how profoundly a system can fail when the people running it refuse to see what is right in front of them. That same failure played out in a very different form in the next case, where a kidnapper was briefly investigated, cleared, and then allowed to hold a girl captive for 9 months in the mountains above Salt Lake City. Elizabeth Smart. A 9-year-old girl lay still in a dark bedroom, pretending to be asleep, while a man walked her older sister out of the house at the point of a weapon. The younger girl, Mary Catherine Smart, could not see his face clearly, but she heard his voice. She would spend months trying to place it, and when she finally did, it broke the entire case open. On the night of June 5th, 2002, at roughly 1 in the morning, a man named Brian David Mitchell cut through a kitchen window screen and entered the Smart family home in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City. He went upstairs to the bedroom that 14-year-old Elizabeth shared with Mary Catherine, woke Elizabeth under threat, and walked her out of the house. He led her on a several-hour hike into the foothills behind the city to a remote campsite where his wife and accomplice, Wanda Barzee, was waiting. Elizabeth Smart came from a close family. She was the second of 6 children, a harpist, and a student at Bryant Middle School. Her father, Ed, had briefly hired Mitchell the previous fall to do roofing work at the house, knowing him only by the street name Emmanuel. For 9 months, Elizabeth was held at a wooded camp in Dry Creek Canyon, tethered by a steel cable to 2 trees and forced to wear robes and a veil. The scope of the harm she endured was relentless. She was subjected to daily abuse, forced to consume alcohol and view pornography, and threatened repeatedly that her family would be harmed if she tried to leave. Mitchell performed a fabricated ceremony on the night of the abduction, declaring Elizabeth his wife. In October of 2002, Mitchell moved the group to Lakeside, California, near San Diego, where they camped in the hills for several months before returning to Utah. The investigation initially went in the wrong direction. Police focused on a different handyman named Richard Ricci, who died of a brain aneurysm in custody in August of 2002 without being charged. The case threatened to go cold. Then, months after the abduction, Mary Catherine Smart's memory surfaced. While paging through a book, something triggered her recall, and she identified the voice from that night as belonging to the man her family knew as Emmanuel. The Smart family pushed police, who initially discounted the lead. On February 3, 2003, the family held a press conference and released a sketch of Mitchell. Within days, Mitchell's own stepson contacted authorities and identified him by name. On March 12, 2003, 2 separate couples in Sandy, Utah, recognized Mitchell walking down a street with 2 veiled women. Police officers stopped them. Elizabeth, disguised in a gray wig, sunglasses, and a veil, initially gave a false name before confirming who she was. Mitchell and Barzee were arrested on the spot. The legal proceedings were long and complicated. Mitchell was repeatedly ruled incompetent to stand trial and disrupted hearings by singing hymns. He was committed to the Utah State Hospital from 2005 to 2008. The case was eventually moved to federal court. On December 10, 2010, a jury convicted Mitchell of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor. On May 25, 2011, he received 2 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Barzee accepted a plea agreement and was sentenced to 15 years. She was released from federal prison on September 19th. 2018, after receiving credit for time already served, a decision that drew public outcry from the Smart family. In April of 2025, Barzee was arrested for allegedly violating her sex offender registry restrictions by visiting parks in Salt Lake City. Those proceedings remain pending. As of 2026, Elizabeth Smart is 38. She married, has 3 children, founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, authored a memoir, and was the subject of a Netflix documentary released in January of 2026. Her abduction directly influenced the expansion of federal Amber Alert systems. Brian David Mitchell remains at a federal penitentiary in Tucson, Arizona. Elizabeth's rescue came because a family refused to stop pushing, even when investigators had moved on. The next survivor had no one searching for her at all. She had to save herself in the dark, from the trunk of a car driven by a man who had already taken 8 lives. Jennifer Asbenson. On the morning of September 28, 1992, a 19-year-old caregiver from Cathedral City, California, near Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley, climbed into a car with a man she had met the night before. Jennifer Asbenson worked the overnight shift at a facility for disabled girls and commuted by city bus. The previous night, she had missed her bus while picking up candy for her clients and accepted a ride from a passing stranger. He had driven her to work without incident and asked for her phone number on arrival. She gave him a fake one. The next morning, when her shift ended at around 6:15, he was waiting outside in his car. She had no reason to think this second ride would end differently. She was wrong. The man driving was Andrew Urdiales, a 28-year-old active-duty United States Marine stationed at 29 Palms. By the time he offered Jennifer Asbenson that second ride, he had already taken 4 lives in Southern California, though no one had connected the cases yet. Once inside the car, Urdiales confronted Asbenson about a false phone number she had given him the night before, then drove into the desert near Desert Hot Springs. He bound her, gagged her, dragged her out of the vehicle, and attacked her. He beat her, bit her on the neck until she bled, choked her, and then threw her into the trunk of his car and drove off toward what she believed was a more isolated location where he intended to finish what he had started. Inside the trunk, in total darkness, Asbenson freed her hands, kicked at the interior panels, and managed to release the trunk latch while the car was still moving. When the vehicle slowed in deep sand, she threw herself out and ran. Urdiales chased her down the road with a machete. She flagged down a pickup truck driven by 2 off-duty Marines who confronted Urdiales and scared him off. They drove her to safety, and she reported the assault, providing a detailed description. But with no DNA recovered from her clothes and tire tracks bulldozed away within days, investigators had almost nothing to work with. Urdiales paused his crimes for several years, partly out of fear that Asbenson could identify him. The breakthrough came on April 22, 1997, when police in Hammond, Indiana, questioned Urdiales over an unrelated matter and asked to test fire his handgun. The ballistics matched his weapon to the shooting of a woman named Laura Uilaki in Hammond the previous year. What followed was something investigators rarely see. Urdiales voluntarily confessed to 8 total acts of taking a life across Illinois and California, spanning nearly a decade, plus the assault on Asbenson, identifying her by name as the one who got away. The legal proceedings spanned 2 decades and 2 states. In Illinois, Urdiales was convicted and sentenced to death twice, in 2002 and again in 2004, each time for a different victim. Both sentences were commuted. The first when Governor George Ryan commuted all Illinois death sentences in January of 2003. The second when Governor Pat Quinn abolished the state's death penalty in March of 2011. California then extradited him. In 2018, Jennifer Asbenson took the stand in Orange County Superior Court and testified at the trial for the 5 California victims. On September 5, 2018, the jury convicted Urdiales on all counts. On October 5th, Judge Greg Prickett sentenced him to death. Less than a month later, on November 1st, 2018, Andrew Urdiales took his own life at San Quentin State Prison. As of 2026, Jennifer Asbenson is 53 years old. She published a memoir in 2019, returned to the desert near Desert Hot Springs in 2017 to record her account on camera, and continues to speak publicly about resilience and survival. Jennifer Asbenson escaped a moving vehicle in the desert, in the dark, with her hands bound. What came next on this list is the story of someone whose escape required something even more unimaginable: walking for miles along a highway after suffering injuries so catastrophic that the first people who saw her drove away in shock. Mary Vincent. In late September of 1978, a teenager was hitchhiking south along Interstate 80 near Berkeley, California, trying to reach her grandfather's home near Los Angeles. Mary Vincent was one of 7 children in a working-class Las Vegas family. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a casino blackjack dealer. By 15, with her parents in the middle of a turbulent divorce, she was a runaway who had been couch surfing and sleeping in unlocked cars. She had traveled to her grandfather's home in Berkeley and was heading south when she fell in with 2 male companions on the highway. A 50-year-old man in a blue van pulled over and insisted on giving only her a ride. Her companions warned her not to go. She was tired, and she got in. The driver was Lawrence Singleton, a merchant seaman and divorced alcoholic from Tampa, Florida. Initially, he drove the agreed route, but after the girl fell asleep, he diverted east into Del Puerto Canyon in Stanislaus County. When she woke and realized something was wrong, he pulled over, claiming he needed a bathroom break. As she stepped out of the vehicle, he struck her from behind. What Singleton did to Mary Vincent over the course of that night was, according to the court record, among the most extreme acts of violence a California courtroom had ever documented. She was 15 years old. The injuries she sustained were catastrophic and permanent, described in trial testimony as deliberate mutilation that left her without both forearms. He then left her in a concrete drainage culvert off Interstate 5 and drove away, believing she would not survive. She survived. Mary Vincent regained consciousness, raised what remained of her arms above her head to slow the blood loss, packed dirt into her wounds, and walked roughly 3 miles barefoot along the highway to flag down a passing vehicle. The first motorists who saw her drove away. A couple who had taken a wrong turn finally stopped, wrapped her in a sheet, and rushed her to a hospital. From her hospital bed, refusing to sleep, Vincent worked with investigators to produce a detailed composite sketch. Singleton was arrested on October 8, 1978, in Sparks, Nevada. At his 1979 trial in San Diego County, Vincent testified and identified him in court, now fitted with prosthetic arms. Singleton was convicted of kidnapping, multiple counts of abuse, attempted taking of a life, and mayhem, a rare common law charge reserved for cases where a victim has been permanently disabled. The judge gave him the maximum sentence allowable under the law at the time, 14 years and 4 months. The judge stated on the record that if he had the authority, he would have imposed a life sentence. And somehow, it gets worse. Singleton was paroled on April 25, 1987, after serving roughly 8 years. Multiple California communities protested his placement so forcefully that Governor George Duke Majian housed him in a trailer on San Quentin prison grounds for the duration of his 1-year parole. His release directly produced what became known as the Singleton Bill, a 1987 California law that established 25 years to life sentences for crimes involving torture and restricted good time credits for violent offenders. Vincent had won a $2.5 million civil judgment against Singleton, but she was never able to collect it. Singleton eventually relocated to Tampa, Florida. On February 19, 1997, he took the life of a 31-year-old woman named Roxanne Hayes inside his Tampa home. Police found him covered in her blood. Mary Vincent traveled from California to Florida to testify at his 1998 trial. The jury convicted him of first-degree taking of a life, and Judge Bob Mitchum imposed the death penalty. Singleton died of cancer on death row at Florida State Prison on December 28, 2001, at the age of 74. As of 2026, Mary Vincent, now Mary Belle McGriff, is 62 years old. She lives in Vaughan, Washington, with her husband, Tony McGriff. She raised 2 sons, attended the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and built a career as a visual artist by modifying her prosthetics to hold brushes and paint. She has given rare but unflinching interviews over the years, always centering her public statements on survival and recovery rather than vengeance. Her case continues to be cited in California sentencing reform debates and in legal discussions surrounding the crime of mayhem. Thanks for watching. Click here to see our next video.